Sometimes life doesn't destroy us, but forces us to be reborn in a way we don't yet understand. And in this silent, almost invisible process, the real miracle happens. If you are listening to this now, there is a high probability that you have healed in ways you haven't realized yet. And perhaps this video is the mirror that will show you how much progress you have made even when you thought you were stuck. Because the truth, my friend, is that healing rarely comes with fireworks. It does not come with applause, nor does it clearly announce its arrival. It comes like the dawn, slowly, gently, and almost shyly, but it changes everything it touches. Carl Jung used to say, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And perhaps this is why many confuse healing with the absence of pain. We think we will be healed when we feel no pain, when the past stops haunting us, when the heart finally stops contracting. But what if the opposite were true? What if healing is the ability to face pain and transform it into power? Have you noticed how society taught us to measure progress by what is visible? Posted smiles, continuous productivity, unwavering optimism, as if healing is synonymous with returning to what we were before everything fell apart. But what if the true sign of evolution is the unwillingness to go back to who we were before everything fell apart? Perhaps you are not broken, but rebuilding yourself in a way that is more honest, deeper, and more suitable for you. Healing is actually silent. It happens when you wake up one day and realize that you no longer feel the need to resurrect old conversations, when the name that used to cause you pain passes through your mind now and doesn't hurt. When you feel peace even without answers, when chaos no longer knows you. There, something sacred is born, even if you cannot see it yet. But there is a deeper truth. Healing is rarely noticed by those who go through it, because unlike wounds, it does not bleed, it blooms. And flowers hurt. Buds must open for flowers to bloom. It is an internal, invisible process, almost secret. And this is exactly what this video is about the 6 signs that you are more healed than you think, even if you haven't noticed it yet. Perhaps you haven't noticed, but there is a new you emerging from under the ruins of the old one, a more conscious, lighter, and more mature you. The pain that used to break you is now teaching you. The silence that used to scare you is now strengthening you. And perhaps the reason you still doubt your healing is that you learn to associate it with noise, with joy, with display. But rebirth is rarely loud. It consists of small things.
The breath that returns to being calm, the thought that ceases to be a prison, the tear that is no longer despair but acceptance. I want you to stay with me until the end of this video because you will discover what Carl Jung called the point of integration, the moment when everything you have lived, suffered, and endured finally aligns and begins to gain meaning. In the end, you will understand how to apply these signs in your own life to live with greater clarity, peace, and purpose. But before that, I want to ask you a question. How many times have you blamed yourself for still feeling pain? How many times have you thought you were regressing when in reality you were just deepening the process? Healing is not a straight line, it is a spiral. Sometimes you return to old pains only to realize that they no longer control you, and that in itself is healing. So as you listen to every word from now on, allow yourself to recognize the signs you were ignoring, the small details that prove that without realizing it, you were walking towards the light. There might be exhaustion, yes, there might be painful memories, but your mere presence here, listening, thinking, trying to understand, is proof that something inside you has not given up. And before we move on to the first sign, let me ask you for something simple yet important. If this topic has meaning for you, if it affects you in some way, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. The upcoming videos will guide you to greater depths in the journey of self-knowledge and inner healing. And if you feel this content can help others, leave a like. Not for vanity, but so that this message reaches those who are most in need of hearing it. It is part of a chain of goodness that starts with a simple gesture. Now, take a deep breath, close your eyes for a moment, and ask yourself, what if I have already healed in ways I can't see yet? Because maybe, just maybe, your healing is not in what you lack, but in what has already begun quietly within you. And this is exactly what we will discover together from now on. Get ready because the first sign that you are more healed than you think is at the same time the simplest and the most liberating of all signs. The first sign that you are more healed than you think is that you no longer chase what once hurt you. Previously, there was an almost desperate need to understand, find answers, and fill the gaps left by people and situations that left without explanation. You wanted to understand why they distanced themselves, why life suddenly changed, and why the story ended this way. And perhaps deep down, you hoped that understanding was the same as healing. But time, this silent teacher, was teaching you something that books don't mention. Not everything that hurts needs an answer. And perhaps this is the first great miracle of healing, when the need for closure
dissolves into acceptance that it is over. Think about how many nights you spent trying to reorganize the past, remembering every word, every gesture, searching for clues that could explain the inexplicable. An infinite rereading of a story that is no longer there. It's an almost human habit, trying to understand why it ended, as if finding the reason would alleviate the void. But one day, and perhaps you don't remember when, tiredness turned into silence. And this silence was not surrender, but emotional maturity. It was the moment you finally realized that the closure you were so desperately seeking would not come from the outside, and that a message, an apology, or a phrase like, "Now I understand what I did," would not bring you peace. Carl Jung used to say, every person who passes through our lives carries a mirror, and in that reflection we see parts of ourselves that we cannot see alone. Sometimes these people appear only to show us what we need to heal. They come and fulfill this invisible purpose and then leave. And as much as it hurts, it is also love, the most painful yet most liberating kind of love. Have you noticed how there are people who leave yet still occupy a place in our thoughts, as if they left an echo? But the truth is, the echo is not their echo, it is yours. It is your mind trying to hold on to what your heart has already understood, that what was has fulfilled its purpose. Healing begins when you accept that some stories do not need to be understood, but only lived and let go, and that closure is not a conversation or a logical explanation, but a silent choice. The choice to stop bleeding over what has already ended. Some say time heals everything, but Jung would have understood that time itself does not heal. It only gives us space to understand things. True healing happens when the heart stops waiting for the return of those who did not know how to stay. Imagine a 58-year-old woman divorced 3 years ago after decades of marriage. For months, she revisited every moment, trying to find the exact point where everything began to collapse. She reread messages, searched for old memories, and tried to understand where she failed. Today, she sits on the same couch she cried on night after night, and she notices something different.
The heaviness is gone. His name no longer evokes the same pain. She no longer needs to understand. She just knows it's over, and that's okay. Or imagine a 43-year-old man who suddenly lost a friend, without explanation, without a farewell. For a long time he wondered what he said wrong, where the connection was lost. Today, when he remembers, he feels nostalgia, yes, but not that sharp pain. It is a quiet nostalgia, without demands, without pressures. He understood that people sometimes do not leave because they want to hurt us. They leave because they no longer fit into the same phase of our evolution. This is the first sign of healing. You no longer need to pursue closure because you found a place inside yourself that knows how to close cycles peacefully. And this is something almost no one talks about. External closure is fragile. It depends on the will of others, time, and circumstances. But internal closure is inviolable. It born when you decide that you do not need permission to move forward. When you stopped reviewing conversations, checking if the person has returned, and searching for answers in old memories, that is when healing begins to breathe within you. In that moment, you understand some endings are actually disguised liberation. Jung believed that life never takes away anything we still need. It only removes what has fulfilled its purpose. And perhaps what you call loss was just the universe making way for something new. For a more mature love, for a more complete version of yourself, for a silence that finally gains meaning. Healing is this, letting the past rest not because it wasn't important, but because it taught you everything it could teach you. And when you walk without looking back, when you don't feel the need to prove, justify, or resurrect, it's because you've reached where you need to be. Healing is not forgetting, it's remembering without hurting yourself. It's looking at the history and acknowledging, I lived, I learned, I matured. And when you do that, the burden lifts. You don't need anyone to come back and tell you it was worth it. You know it was worth it. And in that moment, the moment the heart stops begging for explanations, the soul finally breathes a sigh of relief. The second sign that you are more healed than you think is a subtle yet deeply liberating one. You no longer feel the need to be understood by others. For a long time, the burden of misunderstanding suffocated you. You were trying to explain who you are, justify your intentions, and prove your worth. Others' judgment of you was a distorted lens on your soul, and you thought you would only feel peace when someone finally said, "Now I understand you." But healing changes everything. One day, you quietly realize that you no longer need to convince anyone of the sincerity of your heart, and that your worth does not depend on others' understanding, and that the truth about who you are, even when no one sees it, is enough. Carl Jung used to say, "What others see in us is often a reflection of what they cannot see in themselves." And when this understanding settles, something changes within you. You begin to look at others' judgments with compassion, not anger, because you understand that the one who mocks your sensitivity is actually afraid of their own sensitivity. When someone minimizes your depth, it is because they don't know how to deal with their own superficiality. But there is a strange detail. Have you noticed how people are afraid of what is real, how authenticity disturbs them? This is because honesty reveals not only you, but others as well, and this is something few are willing to face. You begin to realize that living in an attempt to be understood by others is a prison disguised as a need for love. It is an attempt to control, the desire to shape others' perception to avoid the discomfort of rejection. But what if I told you that true self-love is born when you accept being misunderstood? When you realize that you no longer need to win invisible arguments or prove the purity of your intentions. Remember how many times you kept silent so as not to upset others, how many times you adapted to be accepted, how many times you swallowed your truth so as not to be seen badly.
That wasn't weakness, it was fear of loneliness. But the irony is, the more you tried to be understood, the further you got from yourself, until, at some point, silence became more honest than any explanation. Have you ever been judged by someone for something you didn't do, yet you chose silence? Not out of surrender, but because you realized that the one who wants to misunderstand you will always find a reason to do so. This is one of the clearest signs of healing, the calmness in the face of distortion, when you don't feel the need to prove anything, when let them think is accompanied by peace and not pride. There is an almost sacred freedom in this state, because for the first time you begin to live for being, not for appearing. You feel complete even without witnesses, and this scares those who still rely on external validation. But at the same time, it inspires those who are tired of living according to others' gaze. How many times did you want to explain your absence, your distance, your choice, and how many times did you realize that the explanation would change nothing? This is emotional maturity, understanding that others only understand what they are prepared to understand, and that trying to impose that understanding is a waste of vital energy. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, requires solitude because awakening consciousness is a narrow path few choose to stay on, and you will inevitably be misunderstood by those who are still asleep. But this is the price of authenticity, losing applause for the sake of freedom. Now stop and think, how many times did you stop expressing yourself for fear of seeming strange, excessive, or too sensitive? And what if these qualities are exactly your greatest talents, the gates to your true inner strength? Perhaps the world needs exactly what you are trying to hide, and perhaps what you call weakness is the purest form of your strength. When you allow yourself to be yourself, even when no one understands you, you begin to make way for people who don't want to understand you, but want to feel you. Share in the comments if this has happened to you before, that moment when you stopped explaining and felt comfort instead of guilt, because these moments reveal the beginning of consciousness, a kind of peace that no longer depends on others' approval. And here lies the secret almost no one talks about. When you don't need to be understood by others, the universe begins to surround you with people who feel you even in silence. It is as if life rewards your non-attachment with new, deeper, and more sincere relationships, people who don't ask why, but say, I feel the same. This is healing. It is stopping the expenditure of energy and explaining what the heart already knows. It is realizing that what used to hurt you due to lack of understanding is now strengthening you as self-knowledge. And it is understanding that ultimately, you never needed others to understand you, but only to respect you. But the most beautiful part is when this respect starts from within you, because from this point on, no external gaze has the power to shake your balance. You no longer need to prove anything, you simply exist. The third sign that you are more healed than you think is when the past loses the power it once had over you. At first, it seems simple, but it is one of the deepest transformations the soul can go through. For a long time, you relived old scenes, places, and sounds. It was enough to hear a song, smell a scent, or remember a date to feel a contraction in your heart as if time had not passed. It was as if every memory was a wound that never heals. But healing does not come with forgetting, it comes with understanding. Have you noticed how a moment from the past sometimes seems to return powerfully, but no longer hurts as before? This is healing manifesting in silence. The mind remembers, but the body no longer reacts. The soul realizes, I lived that, but I am no longer that. Neuroscience confirms what Jung sensed decades ago. The brain does not distinguish between a real memory and an imagined one. Every time you relive a painful moment, the body reacts as if it were happening again, which is why the past is so heavy. It is not just a memory, it is a biochemical repetition of unresolved emotions. But something changes when you start looking at the past without trying to change it, when the goal shifts from understanding why to accepting what was. At that moment, the brain also changes. Recent studies show that when we emotionally accept an experience, the neural connections associated with pain begin to weaken. What was once a trigger is now a teaching. Can you recall a memory that used to make you cry, and now it only brings you silence? This silence is a sign of strength. It is life saying, you have internalized the lesson. And it's strange how it sometimes happens imperceptibly. One day, you suddenly realize that you no longer revisit the past with the same heaviness, that the nostalgia is lighter, that old love, that lost friendship, that mistake that haunted you are now just a chapter, and chapters do not define the whole book. Carl Jung used to say, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. How many times did you repeat patterns without realizing, attracting the same kind of people, repeating the same pains, and reacting the same way? The past is not just a chronology, it is an emotional programming. As long as you don't understand, it will continue to guide you. But when you illuminate those shadows, when you notice their repetition and say no more, that is when the story changes. There is an interesting fact. Psychologists estimate that about 95% of our daily thoughts are repetitions of previous days, meaning we spend most of the time reliving the past, even if unconsciously. This explains why most people feel they are not progressing. But the moment you break this cycle, where automatic thinking is replaced by presence,
is the moment the past loses its control over the present. Imagine a woman rereading the message that ended her relationship. For years, she reads and rereads it, interprets it, and searches between the lines. With every reading, she feels the same pain. One day, without planning it, she opens the same file and reads it again. But this time, she feels no anger, no nostalgia. She only feels a slight fatigue followed by a silent understanding. I wouldn't change anything. I had to live that to be who I am now. This realization is the invisible sign of a heart at peace. Or think of a man carrying the guilt of an old decision. He used to think that if he had done something differently, everything would have changed. But time showed that every choice led him to new learning, new people, and new versions of himself. When he finally understands that the past was not a mistake, but a lesson, he is liberated. How many times have you trapped yourself trying to correct what is over? What if life did not require you to erase anything, only to see things differently? Perhaps what you call regret is just the maturation of consciousness. Because when you evolve, you inevitably look back and
Realize that the person you were did not have the answers you have today. And this changes everything. The past stops being a prison and becomes a teacher. The pain stops being a burden and becomes a purpose. Jung used to say that integrating the past is essential for individuation, the process of becoming whole. And becoming whole does not mean erasing the shadows, but giving them a new meaning. Trauma, loss, mistake, void, everything you lived was raw material for your consciousness. Every tear was a tool shaping your understanding. And thus, pain transforms into wisdom when you stop resisting it. Today, perhaps you look at the past and still feel a lump in your throat. But notice, this lump no longer suffocates you. It only reminds you that you survived. And survival in times like ours is in itself a courageous act. Many believe that healing is forgetting, but no. Healing is remembering and yet choosing peace. Healing is visiting the very place that hurt you and feeling calm. Healing is hearing the same song and smiling, not because the pain is gone, but because you have changed. When the past stops defining your present, you become free. And when freedom settles, something more powerful begins to happen. The solitude that was once a punishment begins to transform into a home. The fifth sign that you are more healed than you think is when you begin to respond instead of react. This may seem like a subtle difference, but it is one of the biggest changes anyone can go through. Previously, any hurtful word, cold silence, or misinterpreted look was a cause for chaos. It was as if every gesture from others had the power to trigger old memories and pains you thought you would overcome. But the truth is, for a long time you weren't reacting to that moment, you were reacting to the sum of all the other moments that remained unanswered inside you. Healing at this stage is not the absence of emotion, but the control over it. It is the moment when the feeling still appears, but it no longer controls you. When you feel anger coming and instead of exploding, you choose to breathe. When fear appears and you listen to it in silence without letting it decide for you, this is when you understand that control lies not in avoiding the feeling, but in choosing what you do with what you feel. Carl Jung said, "Emotional maturity begins when we stop being led by the unconscious, when emotions stop driving us and start revealing us." And this is exactly what happens when you stop reacting automatically. You start seeing yourself as an observer of your mind. The pain is still there, but it now comes to you as a message, not as an enemy. Have you noticed how in most discussions, people do not listen to understand, but to reply? This is a symptom of reactivity, the need to defend oneself before understanding. But when you begin to heal, a gap appears between the stimulus and the response. And in this small gap lies all your freedom. The new you is born there. Think about that day when someone said something rude to you, but instead of replying, you just smiled and chose silence. Not because you felt inferior, but because you understood that the other no longer needed to be a mirror for your pain. This is healing. It is when you no longer need to prove who you are, nor to correct the distorted view others see in you. It is when you understand that what comes from others says more about them than it says about you. Modern psychology confirms what Jung said almost a century ago. Between the impulse and the action, there is a fraction of a second where consciousness can intervene. He who learns to live in this gap completely changes the way he lives. The heart slows down, the body calms, and the thoughts become clearer. This is the moment when the soul takes the reins of the mind. It is interesting to note that when you start responding instead of reacting, even the people around you change, as if your calm eliminates conflicts. Peace becomes contagious. You no longer enter into wars that don't concern you. You no longer need to win arguments because you realize that true strength is not getting carried away by others' emotional storm. How many times have you felt you lost control of a situation and then regretted saying something you didn't mean? And how many times have you noticed that the regret was not due to the anger itself, but to not pausing between feeling and acting? This space is where healing resides,
And he who finds it also finds a new kind of strength, the strength to remain intact even when the world around you is torn apart. Healing at the stage is silent. No one sees when it happens. There is no applause when you choose self-control instead of explosion. No one notices the internal effort of breathing deeply, looking inward, and making a conscious decision about how to respond. But you know, and this knowledge is what sets you apart, because inner peace is never loud. It expresses itself in small yet powerful gestures. A calm reply, a still gaze, a word "it's okay" coming from a calm heart, not from surrender. Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." When you start responding consciously, this is what happens. You awaken. You stop being a reflection of the world and become a presence in it. You stop being led by emotion and start leading it. It is the moment when the unconscious stops directing your life and consciousness takes over. There is something profoundly spiritual in this change, because when you stop reacting, you break the cycle of suffering. The energy that was previously used for self-defense is now used for creativity, understanding, and forgiveness. You start responding to life with wisdom, not with wounds. And this transition is the beginning of true freedom, the one that does not depend on the behavior of others or on external circumstances. Perhaps this is what you are experiencing now, even without realizing it. A maturity witnessed by no one, but one that changes everything from within. A kind of calmness that comes when you understand that every emotion is just a wave, and you are the entire ocean. And when you reach this point, something extraordinary begins to happen. The energy that was previously used for reacting now transforms into creativity. Pain becomes inspiration, silence becomes expression, solitude becomes a source of meaning. You start creating instead of escaping, and this is what we need to talk about now. How to transform everything you have learned and experienced into practice, into a direction, into a goal. A deep and authentic step-by-step plan on how to apply this new consciousness in your daily life. Because healing does not end here, it begins when you learn how to live what you have already understood. A time comes in the journey when thought must transform into practice. You have already understood what healing means. Now is the time to live that healing consciously. And it is not about changing the external world, but about changing the way you see it. Healing is an act of presence that begins when you decide that your past will not write the next chapters of your life. And today, I want to guide you through a simple yet deeply transformative plan. A way to make everything said so far a living part of your routine. The first step is to recognize the signals. You cannot change what you still deny, so every day before bed, ask yourself, what made me react today? What made me feel fear, anger, or guilt? Not to judge yourself, but to observe. This small exercise in self-observation is one of the keys Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. And becoming whole does not mean erasing the shadows, but giving them a new meaning. Trauma, loss, mistake, void, everything you lived was raw material for your consciousness. Every tear was a tool shaping your understanding. And thus, pain transforms into wisdom when you stop resisting it. Today, perhaps you look at the past and still feel a lump in your throat. But notice, this lump no longer suffocates you. It only reminds you that you survived. And survival in times like ours is in itself a courageous act. Many believe that healing is forgetting, but no. Healing is remembering and yet choosing peace. Healing is visiting the very place that hurt you and feeling calm. Healing is hearing the same song and smiling, not because the pain is gone, but because you have changed. When the past stops defining your present, you become